Join us for Shadows of Privilege, a story that follows Maggie Daniels, a mother driven by desperation as she seeks life-saving treatment for her son, Ethan, at the prestigious Lewis Medical Institute. A chance encounter with Samuel Lewis, a man she misjudges from the start, sets off a chain of events that challenges her beliefs and reshapes her understanding of compassion and community. What begins as a journey marked by fear evolves into one of self-discovery and unexpected bonds. How will Maggie's path intersect with the very man whose influence runs deeper than she knows? And can she confront her own assumptions to find hope and belonging? Dive into this powerful narrative of transformation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and move you. Maggie Daniels shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic seat of the airport terminal, her mind racing with a flurry of last-minute preparations and unspoken fears. The sterile hum of the airport buzzed around her, a blend of overhead announcements, rolling suitcases, and the anxious chatter of other travelers. But Maggie's world had shrunk to the fragile figure of her son, Ethan, who sat beside her, bundled in a puffy blue jacket that seemed too heavy for his small frame. "Mommy, can I have some water?" Ethan's voice was thin, weary, as if the effort of speaking sapped his limited strength. His pale skin and shadowed eyes were constant reminders of the cruel turn their lives had taken. A rare autoimmune disorder had turned their once vibrant world into a blur of doctors, hospital rooms, and research. Maggie reached for the bottle in her carry-on, twisting off the cap with a forced smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Small sips, okay." She tipped the bottle gently to his lips and watched as he drank, each swallow painfully deliberate. The intercom crackled to life, announcing the final boarding call for their flight to Philadelphia. Maggie's chest tightened. The city that housed Lewis Medical Institute had become a symbol of hope, the last bright spot in a journey clouded by uncertainty. She pushed herself to her feet, grabbing their bags while guiding Ethan with a firm but gentle hand. His feet shuffled obediently, the sound barely audible over the rush of people around them. As they neared the boarding gate, Maggie's eyes caught a brief but poignant sight, a tall, older black man in a sharp suit, walking with an air of unassuming confidence. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and beside him was a boy around Ethan's age, his curls bouncing as he moved with an effortless, boyish energy. The two were deep in conversation, the man's voice low and warm, the boy's laughter rising like a bell in response. For a moment, Maggie felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't envy, but a sense of displacement, as if that easy, joyous exchange was a language she no longer spoke. The line for boarding crept forward, and Maggie felt the weight of fatigue pressing against her. She glanced again at the older man and the boy, noting how the other passengers moved around them with quiet, deferential space. She realized they were in first class, their boarding passes gripped casually but confidently. Ethan tugged on her sleeve. "Are we going to be up front too, Mommy?" His voice was hopeful, and Maggie's heart twisted. In the past, their flights had often been marked by spacious seats and little luxuries she took for granted. Now, each dollar was stretched thin, funneled into medical bills and travel expenses. "No, honey, we're a little further back this time." She forced another smile. Ethan nodded, trying to look brave as he adjusted his backpack. As they settled into their seats in economy, Maggie scanned the cabin. The older man and the boy sat across the aisle, and a few rows ahead, the boy's laughter still a soft echo. Maggie felt her earlier sense of displacement transform into discomfort. There was no logic to it, just the gnaw of unease that whispered through her, pulling her eyes away and compelling her to stare out the window. The flight crew's movements brought order to the chaos, ensuring luggage was stored and seatbelts were clicked into place. As the plane prepared to taxi, a mild commotion arose in the aisle as late boarding passengers jostled past. The woman next to Maggie whispered complaints under her breath about space and noise, and Maggie nodded absently, distracted by her own growing sense of restlessness. Finally, an attendant paused near their row. Maggie seized the moment, her voice low and careful. "Excuse me, miss," she said, her tone more clipped than intended. Would it be possible to move those two passengers? She nodded subtly towards Samuel and Tyler. It might be better for my son, with all the noise. The attendant blinked, processing the request. A faint frown tugged at the corners of her mouth. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're at full capacity today. I assure you, they'll remain respectful of the cabin environment. The response was polite, professional, but beneath it lay a subtle, unyielding rebuke. Maggie's cheeks flushed. She shifted in her seat, feeling the eyes of nearby passengers on her, their glances sharp with judgment. Samuel, still turned toward Tyler, seemed oblivious, or perhaps he was choosing not to acknowledge the scene. Tyler, his focus deep in a book, was unaware of the moment that rippled around them. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the cabin and signaling the beginning of their ascent. Maggie tried to anchor herself in the routine, adjusting Ethan's blanket, checking the seatbelt, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible. But every shift in the air around her pulled her back to Samuel and Tyler. The soft timbre of Samuel's voice carried across the aisle as he pointed out the curve of the wing and the horizon stretching into the sky, drawing Tyler's gaze with a wonder that tugged at Maggie's conscience. Isn't it amazing, Tyler? Samuel said. Look how small everything looks from up here. It reminds us how big the world really is, even when our problems feel so heavy. Maggie caught the words and felt a pang of something she wasn't ready to name. Was it guilt? Shame? The plane soared higher, and soon the city below dissolved into a patchwork quilt of greens and grays. Ethan stirred beside her, mumbling as he shifted in his sleep. Maggie brushed her fingers through his hair, the soft strands damp with sweat. Mommy! His eyes cracked open, and he looked up at her with a drowsy smile. Are we there yet? Not yet, sweetheart, she whispered, leaning down so their faces were close. The scent of his baby's shampoo lingered, a last vestige of simpler times. Samuel glanced back just then, his eyes catching Maggie's. It was a momentary connection, silent and unmeasured, but there was something behind his gaze, something that made Maggie's chest tighten. She averted her eyes, fixing her attention on the wing outside. The descent was announced, jolting Maggie from a restless nap. She looked around, gathering her thoughts and checking on Ethan, who was still asleep, his cheek pressed against her arm. The plane's slow, dipping motion made her stomach clench, but it was the sight of Samuel and Tyler preparing for landing that caught her attention once more. Tyler was now gazing out the window, wide-eyed, and Samuel was explaining the city's landmarks below, pointing and tracing invisible lines. Their ease, their comfort with each other, only sharpened Maggie's awareness of her own tension. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Maggie gathered their belongings with a practiced efficiency. The crowd surged forward, a tangle of luggage and voices. Samuel and Tyler were swept into the flow, their confident strides never faltering. Maggie followed, guiding Ethan with one hand, their pace slower and more cautious. Outside the terminal, the air was different, brisker, full of the sounds of car horns and distant voices. Maggie drew in a breath, steeling herself for the final leg of their journey. The hospital was a short drive away, its reputation legendary for giving hope where others had failed. But now, with exhaustion settling into her bones and Samuel's presence lingering like an unfinished sentence, Maggie wondered if she was prepared for what awaited. The entrance to Lewis Medical Institute was all gleaming glass and polished steel, a beacon of modern medicine. Banners with the institution's motto, "Excellence in Care for All," fluttered in the late afternoon wind. Maggie felt an odd mix of hope and intimidation as they approached. Inside, the lobby was bustling with activity. Doctors in white coats moved with purpose. Nurses greeted patients warmly, and the hum of life filled the expansive space. Maggie adjusted her grip on Ethan's hand, absorbing the scene with a sense of urgency. "Welcome to Lewis Medical Institute," a receptionist said, her voice bright and efficient. "How can I assist you?" "We're here for Ethan Daniels. He has an appointment with Dr. Patel," Maggie replied, her voice wavering slightly as she said Ethan's name, as if the admission made everything more real. The receptionist's eyes softened, and she typed quickly. "Of course. If you'd like to have a seat in the pediatric waiting area, Dr. Patel will be with you shortly. As they moved to the waiting area, Maggie's heart stilled when she saw Samuel and Tyler seated in the corner. Tyler was flipping through a colorful magazine, while Samuel watched him with a fond, protective smile. His presence was unmistakable, calm, assured, radiating quiet strength. Maggie's mind raced with questions. Was he here for treatment? Did he know Dr. Patel? The familiarity of his manner suggested something deeper, something she hadn't considered. Ethan's small voice broke her trance. "Mommy, can we look at the fish tank?" He pointed to the large, saltwater tank that dominated one wall, its bright coral and darting fish a cheerful distraction. "Of course," she said, forcing herself to focus on Ethan's joy, even as Samuel's image loomed at the edge of her awareness. The waiting area was designed to comfort. Soft chairs, soothing pastel walls, and the gentle gurgle of the fish tank that entranced children and distracted parents alike. Maggie guided Ethan to a seat near the tank, where the neon fish darted and wove through the coral. Ethan's smile, small but genuine, eased some of the tension gripping her chest. Across the room, Samuel leaned forward, elbows on his knees as he spoke quietly to Tyler. The boy's eyes lit up, and he nodded enthusiastically, his curls bouncing with each motion. Maggie couldn't catch their conversation, but felt its warmth, the simple bond between grandfather and grandson that seemed unbreakable. The moment stretched on, marked only by the slow tick of the clock on the wall and the rustling of magazines as other parents shifted anxiously. Maggie's mind wandered, tracing and retracing the path that had led them here. The endless phone calls, the frantic research, the feeling of helplessness as each specialist declared they couldn't help. Lewis Medical Institute was the last hope, a beacon that promised possibility when others had failed. Ethan Daniels? The voice was clear, drawing Maggie's head up like a lifeline. A tall, kind-faced nurse with dark hair, pulled into a bun, stood at the threshold of the hallway. Maggie quickly gathered their bags and helped Ethan to his feet, her hand trembling as she squeezed his small fingers in hers. As they made their way past Samuel and Tyler, Maggie couldn't help but glance at them. Samuel's eyes met hers, just for a moment, his expression unreadable but somehow knowing. Maggie's stomach twisted, guilt and confusion knotting together. She didn't have time to dwell on it. Dr. Patel awaited, and with him, the answers they so desperately needed. Dr. Raj Patel was a man whose presence filled the room without overwhelming it. Tall and composed, his glasses caught the light as he flipped through Ethan's medical file. "Mrs. Daniels, Ethan," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Thank you for making the journey. I've reviewed everything you sent over, and I believe we can offer a treatment plan that holds promise." Maggie felt a surge of relief, so sudden it left her lightheaded. "You really think so?" The words slipped out in a rush, laced with disbelief and hope in equal measure. "I do," Dr. Patel confirmed, glancing down at Ethan, who fidgeted on the exam table. "It won't be easy, and there will be challenges, but I think we have a good shot at stabilizing Ethan's condition." As Dr. Patel outlined the process, Maggie clung to every word, her mind trying to absorb the unfamiliar medical terms and timelines. But a faint laugh from the hallway interrupted her focus. It was Tyler, and soon after, Samuel's low voice followed. The sound was soothing, even here in the sterile brightness of the exam room. Maggie's pulse quickened at the thought that Samuel, the man whose silent witness on the plane haunted her, was just beyond the door. "Mrs. Daniels?" Dr. Patel's voice brought her back. She blinked and refocused, nodding quickly. "Sorry, I'm listening," she managed, embarrassed by her distraction. "I understand this is overwhelming," Dr. Patel said, a hint of sympathy softening his features. "If you have questions later, don't hesitate to reach out. For now, I'd like to get Ethan started on some preliminary tests." Maggie glanced at her son, who was watching her with wide eyes, a silent plea for reassurance. She mustered a smile and squeezed his hand. "We're ready," she said, hoping the statement would steady them both. The test took most of the afternoon, and Maggie spent the hours alternating between the waiting room and brief, sterile check-ins with Ethan. Each time she sat down, she felt eyes on her. Samuel was still there, flipping through a worn paperback while Tyler napped beside him, one arm curled around his stuffed dinosaur. The sight was disarming. The formidable man from the plane, who she now knew commanded respect among the staff, seemed so utterly human and approachable. The minutes turned into an hour, then two. The waiting room silence was broken only by the soft murmur of conversations and the occasional laugh of a child who had momentarily forgotten they were in a place defined by worry and hope. Finally, the nurse appeared again, calling for Maggie. As she stood, Samuel looked up, their eyes meeting for the second time that day. This time, Maggie held the gaze a moment longer before looking away, heat creeping into her cheeks. There was no malice in his eyes, no judgment, just a calm, patient watchfulness that made her insides twist uncomfortably. The consultation room was brighter this time, the setting sun casting a warm glow through the tall windows. Ethan lay on the exam table, drowsy but alert enough to give Maggie a sleepy smile. Dr. Patel reappeared, carrying a file and a look that suggested cautious optimism. "We're off to a good start," he said, setting the file down. "Ethan responded well to the initial tests, and we'll begin the next phase tomorrow." Maggie exhaled, feeling some of the weight lift. "Thank you, Dr. Patel," she said, her voice shaking slightly with the relief that settled deeper with each word. As they left the room, Maggie paused in the hallway, suddenly aware of the late hour. The hospital's fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, casting long, sharp shadows. Ethan tugged at her hand, and she turned to see Samuel and Tyler at the end of the hallway, preparing to leave. The older man caught her eye again, but this time she noticed the nurse who passed him offer a respectful nod, a small gesture that spoke volumes. The realization that Samuel was not just another patient or visitor sank in with a sudden clarity that made her heart thud painfully. "Mommy, are you okay?" Ethan's question brought her back to the moment. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. "Let's get some rest. We got a big day tomorrow." But as they walked away, the image of Samuel remained fixed in her mind, now tinted with questions and an uneasy sense of recognition that she couldn't shake. The guest housing provided by the hospital was comfortable but plain, with soft lighting and calming artwork on the walls. Maggie settled Ethan in a bed, tucking the blanket around him and smoothing his hair. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion finally overtaking him after the long day. As silence wrapped around the room, Maggie sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. The day's events replayed in her mind, each moment sharpening into focus. The look on the flight attendant's face, the whispered disapproval from nearby passengers, Samuel's measured response, and finally, the way the staff had acknowledged him with respect. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed, her earlier assumptions unraveling into something raw and uncomfortable. Across the hallway, through the thin walls, she could hear the muffled laughter of Tyler and Samuel, the sound warm and familiar. It filled the space like a song, touching something deep within her that she hadn't confronted in a long time. Maggie closed her eyes, the reality of their situation settling into a quiet ache. Tomorrow would be another day at Lewis Medical Institute, another step toward hope for Ethan. But tonight, in the soft shadows of the room, she grappled with a silent question that loomed larger than ever. Who was Samuel Lewis, and why did he make her feel like she had more to learn than just the intricacies of her son's illness? The morning light streamed through the guesthouse window, pale and tentative. Maggie woke to the soft breathing of Ethan, still lost in sleep. For a brief moment, the day seemed ordinary, just another morning filled with the quiet ritual of waking up her son. But the sterile scent of hospital linens brought her back to reality. Today was the first full day of treatment, and hope and fear warred for control inside her. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple cardigan and jeans, and helped Ethan into his clothes. His eyes were brighter today, curiosity flickering beneath his usual weariness. "Are we going to see the big fish again?" he asked, his small hand reaching for hers. "Yes, maybe later," Maggie replied, her voice light as she tied his sneakers. The memory of Samuel and Tyler's presence in the waiting room resurfaced, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the immediate needs of the day. The halls of Lewis Medical Institute were already alive with movement as nurses wheeled carts and doctors strode purposefully between rooms. Maggie held Ethan's hand tightly, guiding him to the pediatric ward where Dr. Patel had said they would begin. Samuel's voice, low and steady, reached her ears before she saw him. He was talking to a nurse, his expression serious but kind. Tyler stood nearby, a little less energetic than yesterday, looking up at his grandfather with admiration. Maggie's stomach clenched as their eyes met for the third time in as many days. Samuel's gaze was calm, acknowledging her with a slight nod. "Good morning," he said, as if they were nothing more than passing acquaintances. "Good morning," Maggie replied, the words stiff as they left her mouth. Ethan looked between them, sensing the adult tension, but saying nothing. The nurse called for Maggie, and she led Ethan forward, acutely aware of Samuel's eyes following them as they entered the examination room. The preliminary treatments were a mix of long procedures and quiet waiting periods. Dr. Patel checked in frequently, his presence a steadying force for Maggie as she watched Ethan go through rounds of IVs and monitoring. The sight of his small arm wrapped in a blood pressure cuff made her throat tighten. "Mommy, I'm okay," Ethan whispered, managing a small, brave smile. "I know, sweetheart. You're doing so well," Maggie said, smoothing his hair. The weight of gratitude pressed against her chest, both for Dr. Patel's dedication and for the existence of a place like Lewis Medical Institute. During a break between procedures, Maggie took Ethan to the children's playroom, a space filled with bright murals and toys. It was a brief reprieve from the sterile medical rooms. Ethan gravitated toward a box of building blocks, his focus shifting from worry to creation. "Maggie, right?" The voice startled her, and she turned to see Samuel leaning against the doorframe. Tyler was beside him, a toy robot in hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that's right. It looks like Ethan's doing well," Samuel said, his eyes gentle as he glanced at the boy stacking blocks. "Better than he has in weeks," Maggie admitted, the confession tumbling out before she could stop it. The air between them felt charged, full of things unsaid. "Tyler wanted to show Ethan his robot," Samuel continued, breaking the silence. Tyler stepped forward, holding out the toy with a shy smile. "Look, it can move." Tyler pressed a button, and the robot's arms lifted in jerky movements. Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment, the room was filled with the laughter of children, pure, unfiltered, and free of the worry that weighed down their parents. Maggie's eyes met Samuel's, and this time, there was something shared between them, a fragile connection that defied the uneasy beginnings of their acquaintance. Over the next few days, Maggie fell into a routine. Mornings were spent in the pediatric ward, afternoons in the waiting room or playroom, always within earshot of Ethan. Each day brought progress and setbacks, small victories offset by moments of doubt. But the tension that had hung between her and Samuel began to unravel in quiet, unexpected ways. They exchanged polite conversation during their shared moments in the waiting area. Maggie learned that Tyler had been through his own health scare years ago, and that Samuel was more than just a dedicated grandfather. He was deeply invested in the hospital's mission. "Tyler was very sick once," Samuel said one afternoon, his voice barely more than a whisper as they watched their grandchildren play. "This place saved him. It's why I do what I do." The words settled over Maggie like a weight, making her heart pound. She wanted to ask more but hesitated, unsure if she had the right. The days of privilege and comfortable ignorance seemed farther away now, replaced by the rawness of shared vulnerability. "You've done a lot for this hospital," Maggie ventured, testing the water. The statement felt clumsy, but Samuel's response was a soft, knowing smile. "I only did what needed to be done," he said, his eyes holding hers. "When you see what's broken, you try to fix it." The answer lingered in Maggie's mind long after they parted ways that day. Maggie sat alone in the hospital's cafe, a steaming cup of coffee cradled between her hands. She sipped slowly, letting the warm liquid ease the tension in her jaw. The cafe was a world apart from the pediatric ward, filled with staff on their breaks, parents grabbing brief moments of normalcy, and the low hum of medical conversations. The table across from her was occupied by two nurses, their voices low as they shared stories of their shifts. One of them, a young man with curly hair and bright eyes, spoke with admiration. "Dr. Patel is incredible, but Mr. Lewis, he's the heart of this place. Did you know he founded it after Tyler's recovery? Turned his success into something that could help thousands." Maggie's breath caught, the words confirming what had been building in her mind. Samuel wasn't just a caring grandfather or a supportive presence. He was the Samuel Lewis, founder of the very institution that held her son's life in its hands. The man she had asked to be moved from his seat on the plane was not just a fellow traveler. He was the reason she was here. A rush of shame flooded her, burning hot across her skin. She remembered the disapproving glances, the flight attendant's frown, and Samuel's calm acceptance. The weight of it all threatened to suffocate her. That evening, as the sky outside the hospital turned from blue to deep purple, Maggie found herself walking the hallways, Ethan safely asleep in his room. The day's realization churned in her mind, and she felt the need for air, for clarity. She turned a corner and almost collided with Samuel, who was deep in conversation with Dr. Patel. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, stepping back quickly. Samuel's eyes softened as he recognized her. "No need for apologies. Long day?" His tone was kind, with no trace of the unease she felt. "Yes," she said, swallowing the knot in her throat. "And I wanted to thank you for being so kind to Ethan, and to me." Samuel's brows lifted slightly, but his expression remained composed. "There's no need for thanks, Maggie. We're all here for the same reason." But Maggie shook her head, the words coming faster now. "No, I need to say this. I was wrong about you, and I didn't even know who you were." The confession was raw, leaving her exposed, but she pushed on. "I let my assumptions cloud my judgment." Samuel's face remained calm, but his eyes carried a sadness that was both profound and empathetic. "We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we do next." His words settled over her, gentle but resolute. Maggie nodded, unable to find the right response. But as Samuel and Dr. Patel walked away, the burden she had carried began to shift. It didn't disappear, but it was lighter now, shared in the acknowledgement of her own shortcomings. The days that followed were marked by progress in Ethan's treatment and a quiet transformation in Maggie. She volunteered to help in the children's playroom when Ethan was resting, interacting with other parents and listening to their stories. Each conversation was a reminder that they were all bound by the same fears and hopes, regardless of background. Samuel continued to visit Tyler, and their paths crossed often, each encounter less strained than the last. The tentative understanding between them grew, nourished by shared smiles and the simple, unspoken agreement to let go of the past. One afternoon, as Maggie watched Ethan laugh with Tyler, Samuel came to stand beside her. "He's doing well," he said, the words carrying a note of satisfaction. Maggie nodded, her throat tight with gratitude. "I think we both are." Samuel smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Good. That's how it should be." And in that moment, the hospital was no longer just a place of worry and treatment. It was a place of healing, not only for Ethan, but for Maggie as well. The hum of the hospital blended with the rhythmic beep of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes against the linoleum. Days at Lewis Medical Institute began to feel familiar to Maggie, almost like an unsettling new normal. She sat by Ethan's bedside, watching his chest rise and fall as he dozed, his small hand still clutching the corner of his blanket. Dr. Patel had said they were seeing positive signs, but caution was the rule here. Celebrations had to wait for certainty. "Hey there," a gentle voice called. Maggie turned to see a nurse with a bright smile and dark curls peeking into the room. "Just checking in to see if you need anything, Mrs. Daniels." "No, thank you," Maggie replied, forcing a small smile. The nurse nodded and left, but the simple exchange was a reminder that support came in many forms. Maggie's mind wandered to Samuel and the way he moved through the hospital, seamlessly blending roles: father figure, mentor, and pillar of quiet strength. In the days since their late-night conversation, Maggie had been reflecting more on her past. Subtle moments of realization came as she replayed interactions that had once seemed innocuous but now carried new meaning. Samuel's patience, Tyler's unfiltered joy. These were things she hadn't looked for but needed to see. Ethan stirred and opened his eyes, his gaze meeting Maggie's with a small, tired smile. "Can we go back to the playroom today?" he asked, hope threading through his voice. "If you're up to it, absolutely," Maggie said, smoothing his hair. She helped him into his slippers, careful not to tug on the 4-line taped to his arm. The playroom was busy that afternoon, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the occasional squeak of toy wheels. Tyler was already there, rolling a bright red fire truck along the floor and making siren sounds. When he saw Ethan, his face lit up. "Hey, Ethan, come play," Tyler called, waving him over. Maggie watched as Ethan's eyes brightened, a spark of his old self peeking through. Samuel stood nearby, his hands in his pockets, eyes following Tyler with an expression that was both protective and content. Maggie approached, her heart a mix of gratitude and nervousness. "Looks like they're getting along well," she said, breaking the silence. Samuel nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small smile. "Kids have a way of finding joy, even when life is hard. Sometimes we forget that as adults." Maggie nodded, the words settling into her like an old truth rediscovered. "Thank you for letting Tyler spend time with Ethan. It means a lot to him." "It's no trouble at all," Samuel said, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. "It's good for Tyler, too. He knows what it's like to be on the other side of those machines." Maggie glanced back at the boys, their laughter filling the room. The weight of her earlier assumptions felt heavier now, tempered by the realization of shared experiences. As the afternoon unfolded, Maggie found herself drifting into conversation with other parents, some there for follow-ups, others beginning new, daunting journeys. One mother, eyes shadowed with exhaustion but animated with hope, shared her story about her son's battle with leukemia. The room buzzed with a mix of stories, some triumphant, others heartbreaking, but all connected by a thread of resilience. Samuel joined them after a while, offering words of encouragement that carried the weight of someone who knew firsthand what it meant to sit in that liminal space between despair and hope. Maggie watched him speak, each sentence deliberates, as though he chose his words to leave a mark. It was clear to her now. Samuel's presence wasn't just known, it was deeply felt. Later, when the playroom emptied and Ethan and Tyler sat cross-legged, engaged in a serious discussion about their favorite superheroes, Samuel approached Maggie once more. He seemed to sense her unspoken questions. "Would you like to join me for coffee?" he asked, tilting his head toward the hospital cafe. Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." The cafe was quieter in the late afternoon, with only a handful of visitors and the soft clinking of cups against saucers. Maggie wrapped her hands around a warm cup, the steam curling into the air as she searched for the right words. "I didn't know," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I didn't know who you were when we met on the plane." Samuel took a sip of his coffee, his expression calm but attentive. "You weren't supposed to. I was just a man traveling with his grandson." The simplicity of his response disarmed her. It wasn't an accusation or a pointed reminder of her mistake, just a statement, plain and honest. "I made assumptions," Maggie admitted, the heat of shame rising to her cheeks. "And now I see how wrong I was, not just about you, but about so many things." Samuel's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "We all carry assumptions, Maggie. They're like shadows that follow us until we choose to turn around and look at them." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the espresso machine and the murmur of distant conversation filling the space between them. The tension that had defined their first interactions felt like it was dissolving, replaced by something more open, more hopeful. "Why did you start the hospital?" Maggie asked, her voice stronger now, fueled by genuine curiosity. Samuel's gaze grew distant, as though he was looking back through the years. "After Tyler's illness, I realized how many children didn't have access to the same quality of care. It wasn't enough to feel grateful for our outcome. I wanted to create a place where every child, every family could come with hope, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. The words resonated, striking a chord deep within Maggie. She thought of her own fears and the privilege that had once insulated her from these hard realities. Now, that insulation was gone, and what remained was raw and humbling. "Thank you for that," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Samuel's answer was a gentle smile, one that carried understanding without needing more words. Back in the ward, the late sunlight cast a warm glow through the large windows, turning everything gold. Ethan and Tyler were still playing, their energy seemingly boundless despite the day's demands. Maggie watched them, feeling the tightness in her chest give way to something softer. "Mommy, can Tyler come over when we're all better?" Ethan called, his voice ringing with the casualness of a childhood request. Maggie glanced at Samuel, who raised an eyebrow, a playful challenge hidden in his expression. "Well, that depends on Mr. Tyler and his busy schedule," she said, laughter threading through her words. Tyler grinned, eyes bright with excitement. "I think we can make that happen," he said, looking to Samuel for confirmation. Samuel nodded, the warmth of the moment filling the room. "I think we can too," he said, and in that small exchange, Maggie felt a bridge being built. Fragile, tentative, but real. The night fell, and the hospital began to quiet, the halls settling into their familiar rhythm of whispers and distant footsteps. Maggie sat by Ethan's bed, holding his hand as he drifted off to sleep, Tyler's laughter still echoing in her ears. The guilt and shame that had weighed her down now felt lighter, replaced by a deeper understanding of compassion and shared humanity. This was only the beginning, Maggie knew. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was stepping in the right direction. The morning was colder than usual, the sky outside the hospital painted in slate-gray hues that matched the anxious feeling in Maggie's chest. Ethan's condition had shown steady improvement, but the weight of each day pressed on her. The moments of connection with Samuel and Tyler had begun to change her perspective, but there was still a distance she hadn't yet bridged, a final leap of understanding she needed to make. Dr. Patel entered the room, his white coat flaring slightly as he walked with the confidence of someone who held answers. "Morning, Mrs. Daniels." "Ethan," he greeted, his eyes scanning the charts. "We'll begin today's procedure shortly. It's a critical step." Maggie's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Patel." After he left, Samuel appeared at the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He extended one toward Maggie, his eyes meeting hers with a hint of solidarity. "You look like you could use this." "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup. The warmth seeped into her fingers, grounding her. They stood in a rare, companionable silence, watching the bustling hallway. Nurses moved like clockwork, voices soft but steady. A distant alarm buzzed, cutting through the quiet, and sending a nurse running down the corridor. The sound made Maggie flinch, a reminder of the constant precariousness of their situation. Samuel's voice broke through her thoughts. "This place holds a lot of stories," he said. "Victories, losses, but mostly it's full of people fighting battles unseen." Maggie swallowed, her voice tight. "I used to think those battles didn't belong to me." Samuel turned, his expression both knowing and patient. And now I see that they do. Maybe they always did, but I was just too comfortable to notice." The confession was difficult, but saying it out loud felt like shedding an old skin. Before Samuel could respond, Dr. Patel returned, his eyes serious. "We're ready for Ethan. Mrs. Daniels, you can wait in the family area." Maggie's heart pounded as she bent down, cupping Ethan's face. "You're going to do great, sweetheart," she whispered, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "I know, Mommy," Ethan said, with a bravery that both broke and fortified her heart. Maggie sat in the family waiting room, the clock ticking its slow, deliberate march. The soft murmur of a television in the corner did little to calm her. Parents around her wore the same mask of hope and exhaustion, and their shared glances were fleeting acknowledgments of an unspoken bond. Samuel entered the room, sitting a few seats away. His presence was steadying, a silent reminder that even in the worst moments, they were not alone. Tyler had been taken for a routine checkup, so Samuel sat without the lively distraction of his grandson. Maggie turned toward him, the silence stretching. "How did you manage it?" she finally asked, her voice small. "All those years when Tyler was sick?" Samuel's eyes met hers, deep and unreadable at first. But then they softened. "By remembering that it was never just about me," he said. "When we give in to fear, it grows. But when we reach out, share that burden, it gets lighter." The truth of his words resonated, wrapping around Maggie's heart. She had spent so much time wrapped in her own fear, isolated by it. She glanced at the clock again, willing time to move faster. An hour felt like an eternity, but then Dr. Patel appeared, his expression worn but relieved. "Ethan's doing well," he said, and Maggie's breath rushed out in a gasp of gratitude. "The treatment went smoothly, and he's responding better than we hoped." Tears blurred her vision as she clasped her hands to her mouth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Samuel's eyes lit with the reflection of her relief, and he gave her a small nod. Maggie reached out impulsively, her hand grasping his in a gesture that was as much for herself as it was for him. For the first time, she felt connected not just by circumstance but by understanding. Dr. Patel continued, "We'll monitor him closely over the next few days, but this is a big step forward." Maggie squeezed Samuel's hand once more before letting go, her gaze full of unshed tears. "You were right. Sharing the burden, it does make it lighter." "It always does," Samuel said, a rare note of emotion cracking his voice. Ethan's recovery brought cautious optimism to the room. He was still pale, but the light in his eyes was brighter, his smiles more frequent. Maggie stayed by his side, their conversations sprinkled with moments of joy she hadn't felt in weeks. Tyler visited daily, carrying books or small toys to share. The boys' laughter filled the room, a melody of innocence that made the sterile environment feel warmer. Maggie watched the two of them with a heart full of gratitude, her eyes flicking to Samuel whenever he entered. Their connection, once tenuous and fraught, had become something steady. One afternoon, as Maggie helped Ethan color a picture of a superhero, Samuel entered with a stack of papers in his hand. "I thought Ethan might like to see the plans for the new wing we're adding to the children's ward," he said. Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really? Can I see?" Samuel sat beside them, spreading the plans across the small table. Maggie leaned in, intrigued by the architectural sketches and notes. "This will mean more rooms, more space for families to stay," Samuel explained. "It's all funded by donations and grants, but every detail is chosen with the children in mind." Maggie's eyes traced the lines of the blueprint, and she felt an unfamiliar warmth, a sense of being part of something greater than herself. "It's incredible," she said, meaning it. Samuel's gaze lingered on her, searching and gentle. "It's built on the idea that we all deserve the best chance, no matter where we come from." Maggie looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you for reminding me of that." The day came when Dr. Patel cleared Ethan for a brief outing to the hospital's garden. It was a small victory, but to Maggie, it felt monumental. She guided Ethan's wheelchair to the sunlit space, where flowers swayed gently in the breeze, their bright petals a splash of hope. Samuel and Tyler were already there, sitting on a bench. Tyler jumped up, his excitement infectious. "Ethan, look, they have ladybugs." Ethan grinned, leaning forward as Tyler brought a tiny bug to his hand. The boys giggled, the sound carrying across the garden like a song. Samuel gestured to an empty spot on the bench, and Maggie sat, the tension of past weeks unwinding under the sun's warmth. "Tomorrow," Samuel said, turning to her, "we're hosting an event for the hospital's anniversary. It's a celebration of everyone who's walked through these doors. I'd like for you and Ethan to come." Maggie's eyes widened. "We'd be honored." The invitation felt like a symbol, a testament to how far she had come from the narrow-mindedness that first accompanied her. She glanced at Samuel, seeing not just a man who had witnessed her failures, but one who had chosen to see past them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, Maggie felt a quiet peace. The journey wasn't over. Ethan's road to recovery would still be long and uncertain. But now, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. The next morning, Lewis Medical Institute was alive with an energy that pulsed through the halls. Staff members strung banners across the main atrium that read, "Celebrating 20 years of hope and healing," and bouquets of fresh flowers were carefully placed at intervals, filling the air with the delicate scent of lilies and roses. Maggie's heart quickened as she and Ethan made their way to the garden for the anniversary event. Ethan's face glowed with a rare excitement that made her chest swell with gratitude. "Are we really going to meet everyone, Mommy?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with the curiosity that only children seem to carry. "Yes, we are," Maggie said, smoothing the wrinkles on his shirt. "And there will be music and maybe even some surprises. Tyler too." Ethan's eyes sparkled with hope. "Yes, Tyler too," Maggie reassured, her eyes drifting to where Samuel stood, speaking with hospital staff. He wore a suit that fit him impeccably, and his demeanor, though professional, had a warmth that never seemed to falter. As the event began, families gathered around the garden's centerpiece, a large fountain that shimmered under the sunlight. The sound of trickling water mingled with the buzz of conversation. Maggie guided Ethan to a seat near the front, the breeze playing with his hair. Samuel stepped forward to address the crowd, the microphone amplifying his voice, steady and resonant. "Thank you all for being here today. 20 years ago, this place was just an idea born out of hope and necessity. Today, it stands as proof that when people come together, we can achieve more than we ever imagined." Maggie felt a lump rise in her throat as Samuel's words carried across the garden. He continued, speaking not just of the hospital's achievements, but of the patients, the parents, and the staff who made it more than just a building. It was a community. "Today," Samuel said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, "we also recognize those who inspire us daily. One family's journey can teach us more than any textbook." "Maggie Daniels, could you and Ethan join me up here for a moment?" Maggie froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Ethan looked up at her, eyes wide with excitement. "Come on, Mommy, let's go." His small hand found hers, grounding her as she stood, her legs shaking slightly. They made their way to the front, the soft murmur of the crowd following them. Samuel extended a hand to help Maggie up the few steps to the podium. The warmth in his eyes steadied her. "Ethan's journey here has reminded us of why we do what we do," Samuel said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "And Maggie, your strength and openness to growth remind us that change is always possible." Maggie's vision blurred with tears as she looked out over the audience. Families whose stories mirrored her own, doctors, nurses, all of them united by shared battles and shared hope. She hadn't expected this moment, hadn't anticipated that her private transformation would become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Samuel turned to Ethan, a broad smile breaking the tension. "And Ethan, I believe you're quite the artist. We'll need your help designing a mural for the new children's wing." Ethan's eyes lit up, and he grinned. "Can I draw superheroes?" "Superheroes would be perfect," Samuel said, laughter threading through his words and rippling into the crowd. After the ceremony, the event unfolded into a celebration. Laughter rang out as children played games, parents exchanged stories, and hospital staff mingled with families. Maggie sat with Ethan as he nibbled on a cookie, his face flushed with happiness. "Did you see, Mommy? I'm going to draw superheroes on the wall," Ethan said, crumbs scattering as he spoke. "I saw, sweetheart," Maggie said, brushing the crumbs from his chin. The air was lighter now, filled with music and chatter. She looked around for Samuel and found him speaking to Dr. Patel and a group of donors, his hands moving in animated gestures. A moment later, he caught her eye and walked over. "How are you two holding up?" Samuel asked, his gaze shifting from Maggie to Ethan. "We're good. More than good," Maggie said, meeting his eyes. The silence that followed was comfortable, a shared recognition of how far they had come. Dr. Patel joined them, his expression pleased. "Ethan, I think you'll need to start thinking about what kind of mural you want to draw," he said, winking at the boy. Superheroes and rockets, Ethan exclaimed, as if the answer were obvious. Dr. Patel chuckled, then turned to Maggie and Samuel. It's moments like these that remind us why we're here. We may deal with the hardest parts of life, but it's the hope and resilience that keep us moving forward. Samuel nodded. It's easy to forget in the midst of it all, but we're stronger when we remember we're in it together. Maggie's eyes met Samuel's, a smile forming that reached her eyes. I'm learning that, she said softly, and Samuel nodded, the moment passing between them like an unspoken promise. As the celebration continued, Samuel gestured for Maggie to join him for a brief walk. There's something I'd like to show you, he said, leading her through the halls that now felt so familiar, yet full of new meaning. They stopped by a wall that displayed photos of past patients and their families, each picture telling a story of hope. In the center was a new addition, a black-and-white photo of Tyler from years ago, beaming despite the 4 taped to his arm. Below it was a plaque that read, "For those who inspire us to keep fighting." Maggie traced the edge of the frame with her fingertips, understanding dawning in her heart. You didn't just build a hospital. You built a reminder that no one fights alone. Samuel's eyes were bright, his voice low. Yes, and that's why I'm glad you're part of this now. I'm glad too, Maggie said, her heart swelling with gratitude and something else, a sense of belonging that she hadn't realized she was missing. As they walked back, the sounds of the celebration grew louder, a testament to the strength of a community built on shared experiences and the quiet, powerful acknowledgement that hope was a bond stronger than fear. The anniversary celebration marked a shift in Maggie's experience at Lewis Medical Institute. The days that followed were no longer just about waiting or watching over Ethan. They were filled with new purpose. Maggie found herself volunteering to help in the children's ward, reading stories, fetching toys, and offering comfort to other parents in the throes of uncertainty. Ethan's condition continued to improve, and his laughter filled their shared hospital room more often than his coughing did. The light in his eyes returned, and he and Tyler became inseparable during their time in the playroom. They shared whispered secrets and giggles that seemed to echo with a new kind of freedom. One morning, as Maggie was folding a small pile of Ethan's clean clothes, Samuel approached. His presence no longer startled her. Instead, it brought a sense of calm. I hear you've been busy helping out, Samuel said, his eyes crinkling with a knowing smile. Maggie nodded, a touch of pride blooming in her chest. I realized there was more I could do than just wait and worry. Samuel's smile deepened. That's the spirit of this place. It's what keeps it alive. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse calling for Samuel's attention, and he excused himself with a nod. Maggie watched him walk down the hallway, thinking how different she felt from the woman who had first stepped into this building, tense, defensive, unaware of the depth of her own biases. Now, she felt grounded in the present, connected to something bigger than herself. The next few days brought steady progress. Dr. Patel confirmed that Ethan's test showed significant improvement, allowing Maggie to finally consider the possibility of discharge. The thought brought relief but was tinged with a bittersweet note. This place had become more than just a temporary haven. It had become a symbol of her own growth, a place where her worldview had shifted irreversibly. After one of Ethan's follow-up appointments, Samuel approached Maggie in the corridor. I wanted to ask you something, he began, his tone businesslike, but with a hint of warmth. Of course, Maggie replied, curious. We're expanding the children's ward, and we need people who understand what it means to be here, to be part of this journey. You've shown more than resilience. You've shown compassion. Would you consider staying on as a volunteer coordinator? Samuel's eyes were steady, searching her face for a response. Maggie's breath caught. The offer was unexpected but felt right. She glanced over at Ethan, who was talking animatedly with Tyler, and realized that this place had indeed changed her. It had given her something she didn't even know she needed, a sense of belonging, a purpose beyond her own circumstances. I'd be honored, she said, a smile breaking across her face. Samuel nodded, satisfaction and gratitude mingling in his expression. Welcome to the team, Maggie. The day of discharge came with the usual mix of relief and anxiety. Maggie packed up their things, folding Ethan's blanket and placing it into the bag last. The hospital room, once filled with the sterile scent of antiseptic and fear, now seemed almost cozy, lined with drawings and get-well cards that Ethan had received from Tyler and other children. As she zipped up the bag, Ethan piped up, "Do we really get to come back for the mural, Mommy?" "Yes, we do," Maggie assured him, her voice warm. The thought of returning no longer brought anxiety. It brought anticipation. It would be a return to something meaningful, a chance to continue what had been started. Samuel and Tyler appeared at the doorway, and Ethan jumped up, racing to give Tyler a hug. Maggie stood and met Samuel's gaze, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for Ethan's care, but for everything you've done for us." Samuel inclined his head, his eyes kind. "It was never just about one family, Maggie. It's about what we can do together." With that, they left the hospital, the sunlight feeling warmer than Maggie remembered. The world outside seemed brighter, as if the shadows that once clouded her understanding had lifted. Back home, the transition was both comforting and surreal. Ethan's room, lined with his favorite books and toys, welcomed them like an old friend. Maggie walked through their house, the familiarity of the space now holding new meaning. She was grateful for the life they were reclaiming, but her perspective had shifted in a way that made her see things differently. The walls, once symbols of their private world, now felt like they had expanded to include the stories of others. Phone calls with Samuel became routine as she prepared to start her role as a volunteer coordinator. He shared insights and advice, his voice warm and encouraging. Each conversation deepened her respect for the man who had once been a silent figure across an airplane aisle. The more she learned, the more she felt that her life had intertwined with his in a way that went beyond circumstance. It was a shared mission. Ethan began talking more about school and friends, and his energy seemed boundless. One evening, as he sketched out a mural design full of superheroes with capes and masks, Maggie realized that this new chapter was full of possibilities. The day of the mural project arrived, and Maggie and Ethan returned to Lewis Medical Institute. The familiar hallways welcomed them, filled with the same mixture of worry and hope. This time, Maggie walked through them with purpose, her new volunteer badge clipped to her shirt. Samuel met them by the playroom, where a group of children and their parents were gathered to contribute to the mural. Tyler waved them over, a paintbrush already in his hand. Maggie helped Ethan settle in, handing him a palette filled with bright colors. As the children began to paint, laughter bubbled up, filling the room with joy. Parents shared stories, some familiar faces from their previous stay, others just beginning their journey. The mural began to take shape, a collage of superheroes, stars, and rockets, each child adding their own touch. Samuel stood beside Maggie, their shared silence no longer one of discomfort, but of understanding. "This is why we're here," he said, nodding toward the mural. "To remind them that they're not alone, that their stories matter." Maggie's heart swelled as she watched Ethan paint, surrounded by the warmth of new friends and the unwavering presence of those who had become like family. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "And to remind ourselves, too." As the mural took shape on the wall, the room became a kaleidoscope of colors, laughter, and hopeful conversation. Maggie watched as Ethan, with Tyler's help, carefully painted a superhero soaring across a sky dotted with stars. Each stroke seemed to lift the weight that had once burdened them, replacing it with a sense of lightness. Parents exchanged knowing looks, each understanding the silent language of resilience and love. Maggie felt an arm gently brush against hers, and she turned to see Dr. Patel observing the mural with a smile. "You've done a lot for this place, Maggie," Dr. Patel said, his voice low enough to stay within their shared moment. "Not just as a parent, but as someone who truly understands what it means to give back." Maggie's eyes glistened. "I think I needed this place more than it needed me," she said, the admission surprising even herself. Dr. Patel's smile deepened. "That's the beauty of community. It gives as much as it receives." The day continued with small, tender moments. A child who had just finished a round of chemo added a bright yellow sun to the mural. His mother, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, whispered words of encouragement that resonated with everyone nearby. Maggie found herself moving from child to child, offering help with paint or simply listening to their stories. The act of being there, of being present, felt like the culmination of everything she had learned. When the afternoon sun dipped lower and painted the room with a warm glow, Samuel approached Maggie. He leaned against the windowsill, watching as Ethan and Tyler argued playfully over which superhero had the best powers. "They've come a long way, haven't they?" he said, his voice carrying a tone that was both reflective and content. Maggie nodded, crossing her arms as if to hold herself steady. "I think we all have." Samuel's gaze softened, and he took a breath as if gathering words that needed to be said. "I've seen so many parents walk through these doors, burdened by worry, consumed by fear. But you found a way to take that and turn it into strength for yourself and for others." Maggie met his eyes, feeling the weight of the compliment settle gently on her shoulders. "It's because of this place, and people like you. You reminded me that hope isn't just something we cling to, it's something we create." The room around them buzzed with activity, but in that moment, it felt like they were standing on an island, surrounded by the unspoken understanding of shared experience. Samuel straightened, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "I've always believed that one person's journey can change the course for others. I didn't know that stepping on that plane months ago would lead to this," he said, gesturing toward the mural and the children at play. Maggie smiled, a deep, genuine smile. "Neither did I." A few days later, Maggie received a letter in her mailbox at home. It was formal, with the hospital's logo embossed at the top, but the handwriting was unmistakably Samuel's. She sat down at the kitchen table, the quiet of the house wrapping around her as she unfolded the paper. "Maggie, I wanted to put into words what the past few months have meant to me and to the hospital. Your journey, Ethan's journey, has touched more lives than you know. When I look at that mural, I see not just art, but a testament to hope, resilience, and the power of community. You once said this place changed you, but I want you to know that you've changed us too. Welcome to the family, officially." "Samuel." Maggie's throat tightened, and she placed the letter down, tracing the words with her fingertips. It was more than just acknowledgement. It was an affirmation of belonging. She wiped away a tear and glanced up as Ethan came bounding into the room, his energy a welcome reminder of all they had gained. "Mommy, can we go back to the hospital tomorrow? Tyler said he's going to start painting a rocket ship next to the superheroes." Maggie laughed, the sound lifting the last traces of doubt from her mind. "Of course we can." Returning to Lewis Medical Institute no longer felt like stepping into the unknown. The walls that once loomed over Maggie as symbols of fear now welcomed her with the warmth of familiarity. The mural had grown even more vibrant, with new additions and the signatures of children who had been part of its creation. Maggie took her place at the volunteer desk, a badge clipped to her shirt that read, "Maggie Daniels, Volunteer Coordinator." She greeted parents with a smile that carried empathy born from shared experience. Samuel stopped by during his rounds, nodding at her with a smile. "Ready for your first official day?" Maggie grinned, the nerves replaced by excitement. "Ready." The day moved quickly, filled with organizing activities, comforting parents, and watching Ethan interact with the other children. Maggie felt a new kind of fulfillment, a quiet pride that came not from what she had endured, but from what she had chosen to do with that experience. As the sun set, casting its warm glow over the mural one last time for the day, Maggie stood back and took it all in. The superheroes, the stars, the rockets, they weren't just drawings. They were symbols of a collective journey, a testament that every battle fought was worth something when shared. Samuel's voice came from behind her. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "Yes," Maggie said, turning to him. "It is, and so is what it represents." They stood in silence for a moment longer, watching as the lights in the hospital flickered on, illuminating the walls and the people within. It was a place of struggle, yes, but but it was also a place of healing where people came not just to be saved, but to find each other in the process. The morning of the hospital's annual gala arrived with a crisp breeze that carried the promise of change. This event was a formal affair meant to celebrate milestones and acknowledge the generous donors who helped sustain Lewis Medical Institute. Maggie adjusted her dress in the hallway mirror, its deep blue fabric chosen for the way it brought out her eyes. Ethan had insisted it was her superhero color. "Mommy, do I look okay?" Ethan's voice came from the living room, where he stood in a little suit, looking both dapper and slightly overwhelmed. Maggie's heart softened. "You look perfect, sweetheart," she said, walking over to adjust his tie. "Just like a real hero." Ethan beamed, and Maggie felt a rush of gratitude for this moment, one that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Together, they set out for the hospital, which tonight had transformed from a place of healing into a beacon of celebration. The atrium was resplendent with twinkling lights and elegant decorations, filled with laughter and the sound of a string quartet playing softly in the corner. Parents, doctors, and benefactors mingled, sharing stories of triumphs and looking forward to a future built on the foundation of hope and resilience. Samuel stood at the center of it all, speaking with a group of board members. When he caught sight of Maggie and Ethan, a genuine smile spread across his face. He excused himself and approached, his suit immaculate, but his eyes kind and welcoming. "I'm glad you made it," he said, giving Ethan a playful pat on the shoulder. "And look at you, dressed for the occasion." Ethan grinned, any shyness replaced by excitement. "I can't wait to see the superheroes on the mural tonight." Samuel chuckled. "You'll see them all right." We made sure the mural room would be open for tours. As the evening progressed, speeches were given, each one touching on the hospital's journey and the lives it had impacted. Maggie watched as parents around her nodded in agreement, eyes shimmering with memories that mirrored her own. When Samuel took the podium, the room quieted, the weight of his presence commanding attention. "Tonight, we honor not just the years of dedication that have brought us here, but the people, children, parents, and staff, who make this place more than a hospital. They make it a home," Samuel said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd and finding Maggie's. "This year, we were reminded that it's not just the doctors or the treatments that heal, it's the community we build around each other." Maggie felt the warmth of those words settle deep within her, a reminder that what she now felt was more than gratitude. It was belonging. As the applause faded, Dr. Patel stepped forward, a piece of paper in his hand and a smile that hinted at something more. "Before we end tonight's festivities, we'd like to recognize one more person who exemplifies what it means to turn hardship into hope," he said. Maggie's heart began to race, realization dawning as Dr. Patel's eyes found hers. "Maggie Daniels, would you join us?" The room erupted into applause as Maggie stood, her legs trembling as she made her way to the stage. Samuel stepped aside, his nod a silent encouragement. Dr. Patel continued, "Maggie's journey with her son, Ethan, has touched everyone here. Her choice to stay and give back has inspired not just the families in our care, but all of us who work here. Maggie, you remind us that strength isn't just enduring hardship, it's using it to lift others." Maggie's eyes shimmered as she accepted the small plaque, engraved with the words, "In gratitude for your dedication and compassion." The applause filled her ears, and she glanced out at Ethan, who was clapping wildly, his eyes bright with pride. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady even as emotion surged in her chest. "This place saved us in more ways than one, and being part of it now is the greatest honor I could ask for." Samuel's eyes met hers, and in that silent exchange, she felt the final piece click into place. The journey that had started with fear and prejudice had come full circle, ending not in solitude, but in unity. After the speeches, guests moved to the children's wing, where the mural had been completed. Parents and children alike crowded in to see the finished artwork. Ethan ran ahead, eager to show off his contributions, Tyler by his side. The mural was breathtaking. Superheroes soared across a sky dotted with stars and planets. And in one corner, Ethan's caped figure stood next to Tyler's, their hands outstretched as if reaching for the stars. At the bottom was a quote in Samuel's handwriting. "Hope is the greatest superpower we have." Maggie's breath caught, the words resonating in a way that only experience could affirm. The room was filled with murmurs of admiration, but to her, it was more than just a mural. It was a testament to the journey they'd all shared, one that turned strangers into friends and adversities into lessons. Samuel stood beside her, his gaze on the mural. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It is," Maggie replied, emotion thick in her voice. "Thank you for everything." "No," Samuel said, turning to face her. "Thank you for reminding us why we're here." As the gala wound down and guests began to trickle out, Maggie sat with Ethan under the soft glow of the hospital's lights. He leaned against her, yawning, the weight of the day finally catching up to him. "Mommy, are we heroes too?" he mumbled, half asleep. Maggie kissed the top of his head, her heart full. "Yes, sweetheart. We're all heroes in our own way." Samuel walked past them, stopping just long enough to place a hand on Maggie's shoulder. "See you in the morning, volunteer coordinator." Maggie smiled up at him. "See you in the morning, Samuel." The hospital, which once felt like a place of fear and the unknown, now held a different meaning. It was a place where hope grew, where community thrived, and where people like her and Samuel, with their different stories and shared purpose, came together to lift each other up. And as they walked out into the cool night air, Maggie felt the last remnants of her old fears fade into the background, replaced by the certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be, together. The following weeks at Lewis Medical Institute were marked by a blend of familiarity and new beginnings. Maggie's role as a volunteer coordinator expanded quickly, filling her days with purpose and structure. She organized schedules, coordinated events for the children, and lent an empathetic ear to parents who, like her, had once walked into the hospital unsure and afraid. One sunny afternoon, Maggie found herself in the playroom where Ethan and Tyler were building a tower out of blocks. The room was filled with the happy hum of children playing, laughter punctuating the air. She stood by the window, the light casting long shadows across the floor, and reflected on how far they had come. A knock on the door drew her attention. It was Samuel, holding a binder full of paperwork and wearing a relaxed smile. "How's it going in here?" he asked, stepping into the room. "Under control," Maggie replied with a playful smirk. "Although, I'm starting to think we need more blocks if we're going to keep up with these two." Samuel chuckled, glancing at the boys. "That could be arranged. I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, lowering his voice. "The board is considering a new outreach program, bringing in parents who've gone through this process to mentor new families. I thought of you immediately." Maggie's eyes widened as she processed the idea. "You mean helping guide them through the beginning stages? Helping them understand they're not alone?" "Exactly," Samuel said, his tone affirming. "No one understands better than someone who's been there." Maggie felt a surge of excitement and pride. It was an opportunity not just to help, but to make a difference in a way that felt deeply personal. "I'd love to be part of that," she said. Samuel nodded, his smile broadening. "I was hoping you'd say that." The outreach program began as a pilot initiative, and Maggie was at the forefront. She met new families in the waiting areas, guided them through the maze of paperwork, and sat with them during their first consultations. Her presence brought comfort, a living reminder that hope wasn't just an abstract concept. It was tangible and present. One day, she met a mother who looked as she once had, tired, anxious, eyes darting as if searching for an escape. The woman's little boy, barely older than Ethan had been, clung to her leg, eyes wide with fear. "Hi, I'm Maggie," she said, approaching with a smile. "This place can feel big and overwhelming, but you're not alone. If you need anything, I'm here." The woman's shoulders visibly relaxed, and a grateful smile softened her expression. "Thank you. It's just so much." Maggie nodded, remembering the days when those words would have been her own. "I know, and it's okay to feel that way. But this place, it has a way of showing you that there's more strength in you than you think." Their conversation continued, filled with small reassurances and shared stories. By the end, Maggie felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the knowledge that she was paying forward what she had once received. The weeks turned into months, and Maggie's role continued to evolve. She worked closely with Samuel on initiatives that extended beyond the hospital's walls. Fundraisers, partnerships with local schools, and wellness programs for families in underserved communities. The work was fulfilling, and each day reinforced the bond she had built with Samuel and the hospital itself. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraising event, Samuel and Maggie lingered in the now empty atrium, sipping coffee and reflecting on the night's events. The room was lit by the glow of strings of fairy lights, casting a warm, serene atmosphere over their conversation. "I never thought my life would take this turn," Maggie said, her voice tinged with wonder. "I was so focused on what I'd lost that I didn't see what I could gain." Samuel nodded, setting his coffee cup on the table. "Life is a way of surprising us. When Tyler got sick, I thought I'd lost everything. But building this place showed me that from loss, we can create something that matters." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Maggie looked around the room, at the banners still fluttering softly, the echoes of laughter from earlier in the evening still vivid in her mind. "You've changed a lot of lives, Samuel," she said, "including mine." Samuel's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, squeezing her hand briefly. "And you've reminded me that change doesn't stop. It grows, spreads, and makes everything around it better." One morning, Maggie walked into Ethan's room to find him at his desk, a serious expression on his face as he sketched. He turned to her, eyes wide with excitement. "Mommy, I drew a picture of the hospital. Look, there's you, and me, and Mr. Samuel, and even Tyler." Maggie's eyes filled with tears as she took in the picture, a detailed rendition of the hospital with superhero figures standing proudly on its roof. Above it, in Ethan's wobbly handwriting, were the words, "A place where heroes live." She pulled him into a hug, the weight of love and pride almost too much to hold. "It's perfect," she whispered. Ethan looked up at her, his face serious. "One day I'm going to work at the hospital too. I'll help kids get better, just like they helped me." Maggie laughed, her heart soaring. "I believe you will, my little hero." Outside, the day was just beginning, the first rays of sunlight bathing the world in gold. It was a new day, full of hope and the promise of everything yet to come. And as Maggie prepared to head back to Lewis Medical Institute, she knew that they had not just survived, they had transformed. The hospital that had once been a place of fear had become a place of purpose, and she was ready to face the future, whatever it held, with strength, compassion, and a heart that had been opened in the most unexpected of ways. A year passed, marked by seasons that seemed to move faster than ever. Each day brought new faces to Lewis Medical Institute, families with eyes full of questions and hearts heavy with the same uncertainty Maggie once knew so well. But in each of those moments, there was a network of support waiting to catch them, with Maggie now a permanent part of it. Ethan's recovery was steady, with follow-up visits that became more routine and less daunting over time. He thrived, his laughter ringing through their home and his curiosity leading him to explore everything from books on rockets to superhero comics that reminded him of the mural he'd helped create. On a quiet afternoon, Maggie found herself standing in front of that mural, tracing the lines of bright capes and soaring figures with her eyes. Parents walked by with their children, some stopping to admire the artwork, others moving on, but all touched by the unspoken bond of being here. Samuel appeared at her side, holding a clipboard and wearing a thoughtful expression. "It never fails to remind me why we do this," he said, gesturing to the wall. Maggie smiled, memories of that first day flooding back. The weight of her journey, the fears, the changes, the growth, settled in her chest like a warm ember. "I never thought something that started with so much fear could end with this much hope." Samuel turned to her, eyes reflecting the mural's colors. "It's because you chose to see it, Maggie. That's where the real strength is." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate through her. The hospital was more than a building. It was a place where hearts healed alongside bodies, where empathy built bridges and hope became the most powerful medicine of all. As the afternoon light dimmed, Maggie made her way to Ethan's room where he was reading with Tyler. The two boys sprawled out on the bed, pages rustling as they flipped through their favorite stories. Maggie leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a smile that reached deep into her heart. "Can we go outside later, Mommy?" Ethan asked, glancing up with a grin that showed a missing front tooth. It was the small, everyday moments like these that made Maggie feel the full weight of their journey's worth. "Of course," she said, walking over to ruffle his hair. "The park is waiting." As they gathered their things and left for the park, the hospital stood behind them, tall and steadfast, a silent guardian that had seen them through their darkest days and led them to brighter ones. The mural, with its superheroes, stars, and outstretched hands, watched over them, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of every choice they made. Maggie had learned that courage wasn't just enduring hardship, it was choosing to rise from it changed. And sometimes, it was found in the most unexpected places, in the kindness of a stranger, in a child's laughter, and in the quiet moments of connection that rebuilt what had been broken. Together, they walked into the sunlit street, a mother and son ready for whatever came next, knowing they were not alone and never would be again. Their story, once rooted in fear, had become one of hope, and in the end, that was the greatest gift they could have ever received. I hope you enjoyed Shadows of Privilege and the powerful journey of resilience, compassion, and transformation. If this story moved you, or if you'd like more content like this, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring tales. Your support means a lot and helps keep stories like these alive. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue to explore stories that touch the heart and celebrate the power of connection.